Hey friends, welcome back to Unfeigned Christianity, where we seek to reconcile our human experiences with God and His Word so we can love from a pure heart, a good conscience, and sincere faith. This week's episode is a little bit different. A couple months ago, I had a friend of mine from here in LA, who is also starting a podcast. He asked if he could interview me for his podcast. He's had it for several years, but it was on a hiatus, and now he's starting it back up again. And so he wondered if he could interview me. And so after doing the interview, I asked him, hey, could I share this episode on my podcast? I have heard other podcasters do that. Sometimes they'll get interviewed somewhere else, and then you share the episode. Then they would share the episode on their platform, and it's always interesting because you hear a little bit different perspective of the podcast host. And so I just thought, well, maybe this would be a good way to give a window into my life. I invite all of you to listen. If you want to support this work, the best way to support Unfeigned Christianity is to become a member. And you can access expanded versions of the podcast episodes, deep dive essays. This episode is long, but I'm not limiting it to members. I'm going to just publish the whole thing, particularly because Kendrick published the whole thing on his platform, and so it's his work, his interview, and so this will be a way of kind of giving an inside look into my story, and then also promoting Kendrick Byler and his podcast, Let It Shine. He enjoys just finding friends of his, people that he knows, and interviewing them about their life story and their testimony. So that's what this is. I hope it's meaningful. Hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, I'd love to interact with you. You can message me or reach out to me some way on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, however. Also, if you're on iTunes, be sure and rate and leave a review of Unfeigned Christianity. We'd love to hear how it's impacting you, whether it's positive or negative. I just enjoy it. Kind of gives a guide how if things have been meaningful connecting with you, or if you prefer a change in something, feel free to share it. Without any further ado, here's my being interviewed by Kendrick Byler.
Good day, and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Let It Shine. It's been a long time since I have recorded an episode and have had the pleasure to record an episode, and a lot has happened in my life since the last episode, almost a year ago. Maybe in a future episode I'll be able to share that, but for today I have another guest on the podcast here, and somebody who is very special, and I say that about all my guests, but I truly mean it about all my guests too, in different ways. Today we have Asher Witmer on the podcast. First off, Asher, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to sit down out of your day, your busy day, to drive down here to my house, first off, and then to sit down and talk and have a conversation here. So yeah, welcome. What would you like to say to the podcast people?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Is this your first interview since
I'm out here? Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yep. No, this is the first one. Yeah. I had plans of like really doing more and like having other people on, and it's just just too busy and haven't gotten around to it.
Oh, no worries. This is good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, Asher lives in the sunny state of California, where I'm currently residing, and we attend the same church, LA Road. And I first met Asher, obviously, when I first moved out here in May of 2021. And have really appreciated hearing Asher share, whether it be a message or just in conversation, whatever it may be. Also, Asher, before we get started here, you also have a podcast of your own. go ahead and shout it out so that people can go find you and where to find that, and I guess give a little bit of a synopsis as to what your podcast is about and what it contains.
Yeah. No, my podcast is called Unfeigned Christianity. It's just we just have raw conversations about Christianity, reconciling human experiences with God and His Word, so we can love from a pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith. But yeah, we're not. I mean, we don't have near the technology. I don't have the technology that you have here, so I'll be learning a few things here. So it's good to.
Nice, very well. All right. So yeah, Asher, why don't you give us a little bit of a background of before? So obviously I don't know too much about you. I will admit I have in the Mennonite world, you seem to be kind of popular, more or less, believe it or not. Back home, I've heard a lot about you, and then coming out here and meeting you, all good things. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Before you lived in California, your family was from Minnesota. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I grew up. I was 17, I think, when we moved out. So the first 17 years of my life, from 1991 to 2008, lived in northern Minnesota. And my dad was ordained as a pastor the year I was born. And I always forget if it was the fall before I was born or the fall after I was born. But basically all my life, my dad has been involved in church leadership of some kind. And so church has definitely been a big part of life. And in 2008, we moved out to California to plant a church in Anabaptist church in the inner city. And there's like Dad had been taking some trips out here. He had been out here, I think, like 3 or 4 different times before 2008, and so that vision, it was just kind of slowly growing, and so we moved out, and I was 17, and when I was 20, I went to Institute for Global Opportunities, IGO, in Thailand. That's where I met Teresa, my wife, and we were one of those couples that you go to Bible school and come back and get married. So, and let's see, that was 2011. In 2012, we got married, and we've been married now almost 10 years. We have 4 kids, and we've since, in our marriage, we have spent 3 years in Thailand. We went back to Thailand a couple years after getting married, and in 2017 moved back here, and have been here for the last almost 5 years now.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, one of the big pieces that has kind of shaped our marriage is that just a few days before our wedding, my mom was killed in a car wreck, and so that has kind of reshaped our family, and even the ministry here. You could say it was still fairly young at the time, and so there's marriage together, and there's many things that we have experienced that cause grief, and so we learn how to process grief. But from its beginning, we've been walking together and learning how to process grief and stuff. And I don't know if that seems like I can go almost anywhere, and people are like, yeah, I remember watching the live stream of your wedding. So that's like what has given some of the popularity, being having a funeral one day and your wedding the next day, or what. But it has not been an easy journey, but God has been good through it, and it's been really good to have Teresa to walk it with.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, there's a small glimpse of just some of your story and the things that God has done in your life. So tell me a little bit more, like growing up before you moved out to LA. What was life like? Like, if you think of when somebody says, like, what was your childhood like? Like, what do you think of? What comes to your mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure when the last time was I was asked that. What was my childhood like? Well, I grew up, I guess I'll just say, I don't know if this is good or bad. I'll just say what comes to my mind first. I was the bad kid, and I said earlier that my dad was a pastor all my growing up years. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure that I soon began to feel because of how naughty I was.
Right, sure.
And not I don't recall that pressure necessarily coming from my parents, but I do remember people making comments. You know, but yeah, I was not a good kid. And what does that mean? I guess we talk with youth out here, and it's like they look at all of us, no matter what we did in our youth, and they're like, oh, you weren't smoking weed at 6 years old or something. But
Right, yeah.
I just had an intense anger problem for one thing, and even if we were at church, like it if something ticked me off, like I could explode right there, if we're outside playing football together or something, and so that was kind of I think the big thing that kind of went before me as far as other people in the church, like everybody knew that, and so that was something. When you first asked me, like, what was my childhood like, the immediate thing that came to mind was pressure, and I don't know, like, I'm not sure that I've ever really thought about that before, but yeah, just the pressure of not being a very good model all the time, I guess, and yeah, I don't other things about childhood. I homeschooled, so I was one of those. Did you homeschool?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my whole I tell people my whole school career, whatever that means. But yeah, my basically all my schooling is homeschool.
Yeah. So all 12 grades were homeschool. We did, I think, kind of the classic homeschooling approach. There's kind of a smattering of things for like the first 6 to 8 years, and then finally settle on something for the last 4 years, maybe.
Sounds about right.
So like my high school, we did the Abeka video
hmm
program,
hmm
but there again, I hated school. I
hmm
did not. I do a lot of writing now, but I hated English. I was speaking of anger and stuff. Like I used to get really angry during school. It just didn't make sense. It was confusing. I remember fighting with my older sister because I don't know if she had graduated. I forget. She's 5 years older than me, so 18, 13. I would have been 13 when she graduated. So even, because I think I was like 11 and 12, she would be helping me with English. She really enjoyed English, and I did not enjoy English. There were five of us kids, so mom took any help that she could. And I just remember one time getting really upset at my sister about English. Like, it was nothing she had done wrong. Um, so the fact that I'm now in Bible college as an adult and I write a lot, I think my mom is probably has probably already rolled over in her grave and looking down from heaven is just like, wow, like God does do miracles.
So, like, as far as schooling goes, were you like did you do well in school when you actually applied yourself? And did you just get frustrated because, like, you didn't want to apply yourself? Or did you just, like, it did not make sense at all?
Yeah, that's a good question because actually, in like even whether at IGO or my Bible college now, I tend to I tend to do well, and my
hmm
classmates are like, "Wow, like you do good," but I don't think of myself as doing well, and
Right.
I think some of that is we were given a good education. I don't. Did you do a Becca at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's that it really prepares you for writing essays or doing
Right.
research
Right.
projects or something. Whereas some people, depending on what their schooling was like, aren't as prepped for that, and so it's you know, or even just learning how to think critically, especially the video school, like you're reading pieces of literature and analyzing it and stuff, and some of that kind of shows up in post uh, grade school, high school work. But in the moment, I felt like I had siblings who could barely work and they would do well. And I felt like I didn't, reading was always hard for me. I'm still a slow reader. I read a lot today. I do a lot of audio book as well.
Nice.
So, especially when you combine, like, if you're reading a book and listening to it, then you get through it a little faster. But
Yeah.
but reading was really slow for me during school, so that was part of why I would get frustrated. There's definitely a lack of applying. Like, my parents didn't really they didn't really buy into or believe in, like, I don't know how they'd say it, the whole ADHD thing.
Oh, yeah.
But I have in my adult life, like, there are aspects of ADD that I do. What's the word? Like, if I read about symptoms of ADD or whatever, it's like, oh, like, I kind of identify with that.
Yeah, right. Sure.
So maybe that was some of it too, like, just not being able to focus well for a long period of time.
Right.
But there's so many other better things to do in life, like go play sports.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Go snowmobiling. And I one time we were going through Minnesota history, because you have to have, it's like 7th or 8th grade, you have to have a year of state history.
Yep.
And it was just a boring black and white pace curriculum. So I think you went through like 4 paces throughout the year or something. And it was so boring compared to everything, whether it was Bob Jones or Rebecca or whatever. That was all colorful and fun. This was black and white. The pictures were stenciled, drawn, and just I didn't even feel like reading, and I knew where the answer key was.
Oh no.
And so I went and got the answer key. We had a toy room that was back. Oh, this is speaking of childhood. I grew up, our family, my dad was a construction worker. He was also a pastor. He owned a construction company. And then we also had a senior home for elderly people who were not bad enough for a nursing home, but they needed assistance. So in our house, they lived up on the main floor. There was no upstairs.
Sure.
And then we as a family lived in the basement.
Nice. Okay.
And so we did school and everything down in the basement. And in the back of the hallway was this toy room. I took the answer key and my history and filled out all the answers and then put the answer key back. I have no clue what Mom was doing that day or like how I could get away with it. But I was done, and then I could go snowmobile. It was like the dead of winter, and I went out and I snowmobiled. But I remember feeling pretty sick as like, it just wasn't that fun snowmobiling.
Right.
I remember confessing later. I can't remember if it was within, that school year yet, or if it was like another year later. But yeah, I don't know if that kind of gives you a glimpse into the chaos that was my childhood.
Yeah, no, it does definitely. Sounds pretty normal, I think, for the most part. Yeah, so like outside of school though, as far as like the community there in Minnesota you lived in, tell me about, did you have like a lot of friends? What was the church like there growing up? How did that affect, I guess, who you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I grew up, northern Minnesota was actually, interestingly, years ago, and I don't have the dates on this at all, but so I would have grown up 90s, early 2000s. I think as early as the 50s, but maybe not that early. Maybe it was more like 70s. There were some missions started in northern Minnesota. There were 5 young men that were like 19 and 20 years old, and they were newlyweds, and they went up through northern Minnesota into Ontario and started various missions and churches. Mm-hmm. And so in our immediate community, there were 4 that would have been started from those missions, if I'm remembering correctly. And they didn't all, so like, just the church building that I grew up in, that most of my childhood memories would be from the church. It was called Christian Life Chapel, and the church building that it was in, one of those early mission churches built that church.
Gotcha.
And there would have been started there. But that church had died. Like there was years spanning between when that church was actually functioning to when our church actually started.
Right.
But our church was a Mennonite, conservative, Anabaptist church, and then there were 3 others, all within about a half hour of each other. Okay. That would have been started as mission churches to the communities there. And obviously, I don't know if you're familiar with northern Minnesota, Ontario much, but there's a lot of Indian reservations and stuff, Native American people through there. And so I think a lot of the missions were started for those people groups, but the particular churches that these 4 that I'm talking about, by the time I was growing up, it would have been all largely transplant, I think, even Anabaptists who moved from maybe Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, anywhere between Pennsylvania and Wisconsin.
Yeah, sure.
Up to there. So our immediate church community would have been, we would have done a lot with those churches. Actually, I mean, kind of just some backstory. When my dad was ordained and when I was born, it would have been a part of one of the other churches. And at the time of my birth, I think only three churches were active. And then I think I was like 6 or 7, and we went through a fairly big church split. And from there, Dad ended up pastoring one of the splits. He had been pastoring. He stepped down. That ended up creating a split, and then he started another one that was more in town, International Falls, Minnesota.
Gotcha.
Anybody who goes up to like Beaver Lake Camp or up through there usually goes through International Falls.
Nice.
So that dynamic created, while we did a lot of stuff with those other churches, there was a lot of pain.
Yeah, right.
From people and the parents. And I actually remember about the time we moved out here to California, my generation was starting to do a lot more together. We would do youth activity, whether it's just like getting together playing hockey or volleyball or something, to having youth camps and youth retreats and stuff that we'd all hang out together at. And they've actually had youth retreats since like 40 years ago or so, maybe 50 years. It's 2022 now. But I don't remember the churches sending as many youth as they were the couple years leading up to us moving out. And so when we moved out, it felt like there was a large community of youth. Now I'm talking to somebody from Holmes County. So a half-hour distance, even like there were 3 other churches 2 hours away. So we would all do stuff together.
Wow.
But we're talking like driving 2 hours to hang out.
Yeah.
And so, that was kind of big in my youth, I guess you could say, those connections. But even so, like obviously compared to Holmes County, we're driving 2 hours, half an hour to connect with another Anabaptist church. My family did quite a bit. Our church was Anabaptist, but it was actually non-denominational. Okay. But it was, everybody was from Anabaptist background.
Right.
And would have still had the strong, Anabaptist values and belief and practice. But our church did quite a bit with other people, other churches in the community, other people in the community too. From age 9, I think I played Little League baseball in our town, International Falls. Oh, nice. And through age 12, and then I thought I was done, and then the high school called and wondered if I'd want to play for high school.
Oh, wow.
And ended up playing, 2 years of junior varsity and then 2 years of actual varsity before we moved out. So that gave me a completely other world outside of the Anabaptist world kind of experience as well in my youth. And so as far as being shaped, I think that's definitely had some significant impact.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you'd say like, as far as you'd have had other friends that weren't necessarily a part of the Anabaptist church there in northern Minnesota, or were most of your friends would have been from the churches there?
Yeah, no, most of my friends would have been from the churches as far as ones I got close to and like told things. But yeah, I had a lot of friends from my various ball teams that I played on.
Sure.
And like my parents, when we moved in 2008, so somewhere between 2005 and 2008, they started doing quite a bit of marriage counseling.
Okay.
And I think I should ask my dad about this, but I think there were like 30 different couples.
Oh wow!
Just from town that they counseled in a span of years there, and those would have all largely been, well, I don't know. Yeah, a lot of them would have not been from the Mennonite churches necessarily.
Sure.
So yeah, I think as far as the close friendships and sharing meaningful experiences with, or deep things on our hearts, my friends would have largely come from the churches there. But I actually still keep up with a couple of my friends from the ball teams as well.
Oh, nice. So, that's really cool.
Yeah. There's one guy I was pretty sure he was going to go to the major leagues, but
really,
he's not there. I think he played in the minors.
Oh, wow.
I could be wrong, but
that's really cool. That's very interesting to hear, because like obviously, like you mentioned, me being from Holmes County is like completely different. Like I basically know no life other than the Anabaptist world, I guess. I mean, there's obviously people that aren't Mennonite in Holmes County, but like it's really hard to go to town or whatever and not see somebody that that like goes to a neighbor church or your own church. And so hearing like obviously you had Anabaptist churches in Minnesota, but like feels like a lot less than what was in Holmes County.
I mean, so the nearest Walmart was in Bemidji, Minnesota. And there's another couple Anabaptist churches down there. And so if we're down there and you're in Walmart and somebody comes in wearing a head cover, like a lady comes in wearing a head covering and dress, them.
Yeah, right, for sure.
And so when I went out to Lancaster or Holmes County for the first time, and you go into Walmart or some store and there's like, wow, like, do I know you?
Yeah. No,
and then my friends are like, stop being weird.
Oh wow, yeah, that's crazy. I've always wondered what it would be like I don't know, growing up in a less populated Mennonite community, how that would have shaped my life differently, I guess. So it's very interesting to hear. And then obviously, like now you're out here, and it's more or less the same thing. I mean, probably even less Mennonite people here in LA or Anabaptist people here in LA than obviously what is in Minnesota. So I guess for the most part, you don't really know any different. I'm sure like going over to IGO, you got to experience a little bit of that type of just like Anabaptist culture bubble, I guess is maybe a word for it.
Yeah, that's probably the closest that I've gotten to it. I spent 2 terms, so there's 6 weeks, so 12 weeks at SMBI, Sharon Mennonite Bible Institute. Yeah. That was my first exposure to Lancaster, and so that was, you kind of get to know more people, Mennonite people there, and the different stripes, and that all fascinates me because there's so many different kinds.
Yeah.
And then the next year, I think it was, went to IGO as a student, and then 3 years later moved back and taught at a school there for different missionary children. So even though my students weren't necessarily a part of IGO or from Mennonite missions, where we went to church and a lot of the community that we did things with would have been a part of Mennonite, a part of IGO.
Right, sure.
And so that was the closest probably to kind of that Anabaptist bubble that that I feel. But yeah, it is something that every now and then I'll talk or go. Well, we thought about this last summer. We took a big trip back east and connected with a lot of friends, and it was really good to see people that we hadn't seen in a couple of years. But you do realize that it's like, man, the world's just so different from our friends in Ohio or Indiana or Pennsylvania.
Right. For sure.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Yeah, so I think that gives us a little bit of a glimpse, like you were saying, into kind of your childhood growing up. Are there any like specific moments or happenings that jump out at you when you think of the younger years, or anything traumatic that may have happened, or something that was like very exciting or good that happened, I guess, to you? Any specific memories that jump out?
Yeah. Oh, there's like three that started coming to mind. This is good. I haven't like sat down and thought about my childhood so much for a while, so it's interesting to have this conversation. There's one is it popped up in our family chat group. I forget who shared it or what it was, but it was an accident that I had snowboarding and face planted, and I just remember, I think I was 11 years old, if I remember. There's no date on the picture and stuff, but if I remember correctly, I would have been 11, and my face swelled up like it was smack. I remember it was probably March, so the end of the season, kind of icy, like at night. It was night skiing up there. I was snowboarding, but so it was icy, and just remember coming down. I was almost down at the bottom of the hill. There was a whole bunch of us doing the run together, and just remember looking up at everybody, and the next thing I knew, I was rolling and seeing stars. I was just like, wow, that had never happened to me before. But it swelled up my face, my whole face that night. My nose was bleeding. My jaw really hurt. We had 2 hours home from there. I remember the medics came out and took me in. I went in on the snowmobile. They didn't put me on the sled or anything. I just rode in with them and examined me. And so we went home. They gave me, some bandages or gauze for the scrapes and stuff. They could tell that seemed like my spine was okay, but my jaw had incredible pain, just super sharp pain. And we drove 2 hours home to where we lived, and I can't remember, if we prayed down at the ski resort or if it was at home, but I just remember we prayed about it, and then the plan was, if it's still hurting so bad, the next day we're going to go in and get it looked at, because it seemed like it was just, right here, for those who can't see, I'm just kind of the middle of my jaw. Like I just remember distinctly both sides, it just hurt like crazy. And I remember the next day waking up and there was no pain, absolutely no pain. And within a day and a half, the swelling all went down. And aside from the fact that like my lip still had where it got busted a little bit, still had the scar, like you wouldn't have known I had an accident.
Wow.
And it was kind of my first encounter to what I feel like I had kind of forgotten about that until it popped up in our family chat. I was like, wow, like that. I remember thinking that must have been a miracle because of the pain that I was in the night before to what I was feeling the next day. So that was definitely, kind of interesting for me. I also, I discussed earlier that I was the bad kid, and I remember there's a good friend, family friends of ours who lived up in Ontario, and the wife was a child psychologist, and I remember mom and dad taking me up there to meet with her. I was really young. I don't know how old I would have been. I was old enough to know that it had to do with me, like because of my issues,
right.
But I was young enough that it was like, this is fun. Like we went to a house and that had, I just remember it had a bunch of like animal skins and antlers and stuff all around.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like looking at all of them, playing with them. And I remember she had me drawing a picture as I talked. I have absolutely no clue what she asked me. I cannot remember what she asked me or what we were talking about or whatever. But I do remember that I drew a picture of a church. And then she asked me at one point, and I don't know this because of my memory. I know this because she told me later, told my parents then. But apparently she asked me what I would do if the church burned down. And my response was that I would build another one. And so as I grow up and become an adult, like church is really important to me.
Right.
It's just the church, the body of Christ. And I've often thought back on that. I was like, obviously my dad was a pastor. I was just in that world. But I think it's, there was something there that God was, I don't know if it's so much God calling me to or just, a vision or burden for church. Because I would not look at that being on any kind of journey with God, with Jesus at that point in my life.
Right,
I was young. But something about that has definitely kind of synthesizes the burden that I have, that I care about the church. And then probably the third one would just be that, I was 12 years old when I was baptized, when I did meet Jesus. And I was a bad kid, and I tell, we talk with some of the youth here today. I was just talking with Furman about it, who recently got baptized, and he was talking about how he's, he just realized he's never going to quite be perfect. So now's the time to just get baptized. And I told him that, like, hey, I feel like I've done most of my sinning after I was baptized. 12 years old is pretty young if you think about it. But I can definitely point a trajectory, like the trajectory of my life changed at 12 years old.
Right.
From not caring at all to caring, to wanting to follow God. And so even when you're struggling with sin, struggling with stuff that all youth do, that's normal. Like that's a part of learning how to follow Jesus. And so even if you're baptized and you're struggling with some of these things, it doesn't mean you're not real or that you're not you're not sincerely wanting to follow Jesus. So, those are the three things that popped into my mind right offhand when you talked about that. As far as, I guess you could say, highs or
just moments that stick out.
Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. So that's a little bit of a glimpse into your childhood. What about like your teenage years, like even like moving out here, or like even before that? Like what was that like, or I guess more specifically moving out here, how did that affect you? Like moving from a place like Minnesota to the big city of LA is obviously a big change and transition. Do you look back at that and see that as it affecting your life, or I guess how did you handle that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I actually hated moving out here.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I was 17 at the time, and it felt like my stage of the youth community was kind of coming into their own. And I had some good friends. There were like 5 of us that would hang out often. Again, we lived, an hour to 2 hours away, so it's not like it was every week necessarily, but we were getting really close. And even, as 16, 17-year-olds sharing, extremely vulnerably with each other about the struggles that we had, and the, things that that we're facing in life and so forth. And so I really struggled, like it tore me apart to leave that.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept up with those friends for a while, you know. Thankfully by 2008 we had good old Facebook and chat, Yahoo chat. That used to be a thing. I don't know. Did you ever do that?
I was way too young for that. No.
So yeah, we kept up with that way, and actually a couple of my good friends actually were out with Choice Books, some of our earliest VSers, which you are now out. That's what brings you out here for. Mm-hmm. So, what was your question?
Basically, yeah.
How did it impact?
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel, I really struggled to, and I'm not sure what the rest of my siblings would say. If other people, I don't like, my two older siblings were pretty much adults at that point, so it wasn't as big of a deal for them that our family moved, because they were probably leaving home anyways.
Right.
And they went on and did. They both went through college and Bible school, and have moved. Like they're no longer living here in Los Angeles. But my younger siblings, I'm not sure if they struggled more or less than me. But I just remember going through a period of intense loneliness and really struggling with. I was just telling my wife the other day, this is really dark, but I remember so I did Choice Books as well. And I can remember get up early morning and there's, maybe nobody quite on the streets yet or something, or just even if you're driving around sometime. I used to enjoy going out to Malibu at like midnight, 11 o'clock at night. I don't know if you've done that at all, but it's like the whole city it's pretty much shut down then.
Right,
you can just fly out there along the 10. I just remember thinking, like, what if you woke up one day and everybody was gone? And you'd have all these streets, all this concrete, all these buildings, and there's nobody there. And I didn't think about it at the time, but like talking about that with my wife, I'm like, that is really dark. It just kind of shows the level of maybe some depression that I was in, just like feeling really lonely. For the first couple of years, we were the only ones out here.
Yeah.
And maybe like a year or two in, we started getting Choice Books VSers. Okay. And then I think it was 3 years in, Sam's moved out, and Jared and Carmen Stolzfus, who are no longer here in LA, but they were the first family to join. And by then, also, we had gotten to know other people just in LA, making other friends and stuff. So yeah, that was, as far as just kind of how it impacted me. It was definitely a lonely season of life. But I also look back on it now, and I don't at all regret the move. The way it's broadened my worldview, the people that I've gotten to know here in LA and know today. I've grown to develop some fairly close friends that I would have never had if we had not moved out here. So yeah, it's, even though it was a super hard thing, like for my youth, it was really hard. It was probably one of the single most life-shaping events of my youth. Like if you think 14 to 20 or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that age, like 17, that's a very... First word that popped into my head is scary, and I don't know why I thought it was scary, but it's like a very important age. Like there's, Yeah. I mean, obviously your whole youth is important to shaping your life, but it's very important. Like 16, when I think about myself, like 16 to 18, somewhere there, just kind of where it shaped a lot of my life. So I'm sure, definitely was not easy leaving all your friends that you had in Minnesota and then just moving out here. And I mean, LA is kind of more or less known, not even like for the Anabaptists, but just people in general, as like a very lonely city. Like it's hard to really connect with people, or at least that's what I've heard and read and listened about, I guess. But yeah, I can't imagine. So you guys moved out here in, you said 2008, and what year did your mom pass away?
It was 2012.
2012. Okay,
So we moved out in April of '08, and then it was November of 2012.
November 2012. Okay. Yeah. Wow. And I'm sure that was hard. I feel, correct me if I'm wrong or not, but I feel like that, like your mom's passing was obviously one of those moments. I kind of view like there's these big happenings, I guess, or moments in everybody's life that really either shapes them or something that they really had to go through. And I'm assuming, I'm like, I can only imagine. I've never lost anybody that close to me. I can only imagine like that had to be obviously extremely hard, and probably one of those moments in your life that you look back on as like one of those big events, I guess, or happenings. Tell me, I guess, a little bit more about that exactly for those of the listeners that didn't know your mom. Tell us, I guess, kind of what happened and yeah, leading up to that, and then after that, how that made you feel, and like how you even tried to process that. Like I can't even imagine.
Yeah. So I was getting married to my wife Teresa, who is from Colorado, and I had gone out 2 weeks before, and Dad and Mom came out a week before. So I think they got out like Saturday night, and then we had Sunday together, Monday, and then Tuesday morning. Our wedding was on Saturday, that Saturday. Tuesday morning, she was, the people we were staying with, I don't know if anyone's familiar with New Horizons in Canyon City in Colorado, but that's the area where my in-laws are from. And the people we were staying with were outside of Canyon City a couple miles. And Mom and my two younger siblings, Christy and Christopher, were coming in. The rest of us were in. Well, my two older siblings weren't living with us anymore, so they hadn't flown in yet for the wedding. But I had gone out for breakfast with Dad that morning. And so we were already in town. Mom and Christy and Christopher were coming into town. Dad had just dropped me off at my in-laws, and we were going to work on wedding stuff, and he was going to go meet the rest of them at Walmart. And we got this text. I remember just kind of getting in the house and getting a text from my sister saying, "Pray for us." We were hit by a truck, or like rear-ended by a truck, because it sounded kind of small, but something about it just like really shook me. I've often wondered, like, it's weird because what she actually said, like, I don't know if it's happened to you out here, but it's not uncommon to have vehicles hit you out here in LA.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it just kind of sounded like maybe something like that. But maybe the thing of pray for us, like why would you have to pray? You were hit by a truck. Did the bumper fall off?
Yeah.
Like what? But anyways, I was texting with her a little bit, and I could tell after a couple minutes that she was not with it really. Like she was kind of not delirious, but is just really scattered in what she was saying. And so I got Teresa, and we hopped in the car and ran over and got Dad. Actually, it must have happened the opposite way. I dropped Dad off at Walmart, because we went over to Walmart, picked up Dad, and then ran out to where the scene was. And I don't remember how we knew where the scene was. That's interesting. I forget some of those details, like how we knew where it was. But we went out to the intersection where it happened, and I just remember it coming up over the rise, and it, trying to figure out like what's going on. Like, is this just kind of a bad rear end, bad fender bender sort of thing? But already at that point, like, there were a couple ambulances out. There was the fire department or some of it was out. There was just a lot. Well, I don't remember what all was out. There were just a lot of flashing lights, a whole crowd of people already, paramedics, and it was just like, whoa, this is way bigger than just being hit by a truck.
Right.
We're pulling up to the intersection. There's this old, I think it was a Dodge pickup truck, like really old, just smashed. The whole front of it was smashed in, and I remember pulling up thinking, because like Canyon City and the outskirts are kind of, it's not uncommon to see a junk vehicle kind of sitting around.
Right.
And like not thinking anything of it. But as we came to the intersection, realizing, whoa, that's the truck that hit them. And then about 100 yards out in the field was the van.
Oh, wow.
And so mom had been in a rush. They were a little bit late, and there was a intersection that was not a four-way stop, and she pulled out in front of the guy who did end up being intoxicated. So he was going, I think it was a 35 45 speed limit zone, if I remember correctly. I think they figured he was probably going 65 or so, 65 or 70. And some of those details are a little fuzzy for me.
Sure.
But right on mom's door, maybe a little bit on the passenger minivan door. Sorry, the one right behind the driver, but yeah, on the driver's side. And it, whatever happened, like she hit the gas and it shot her out into the field until it just came to a stop, I guess. Wow. And so yeah, we got there, and Karita was there by that point, and kind of with Christy. Christy was kind of walking around and still like not really with it. Christopher was on a stretcher with a neck brace. He actually looked the worst when we first got there. Kind of freaked, like, what in the world happened? He had been sitting right behind mom and had a bruise or something on his head, and so that's why they stabilized his neck and everything. And maybe I think he was pretty with it though mentally. Christy seemed the most disoriented, and then mom was out. They had her also on a stretcher, and she was not. Her eyes were not open. She wasn't really doing anything. She was responding. So if they would tell her to squeeze their fingers or whatever, she would respond by squeezing. But she was not opening her eyes. She wasn't talking at all or really moving her limbs that much, just kind of moaning a little bit. And I was immediately more preoccupied with Christy and Christopher. Dad went to be with mom, and after a while the helicopter came and they life flighted her out of the helicopter. And remember kind of saying goodbye. I don't think I went up and physically touched her or anything, but saw her, the helicopter take off and go, and then we had sent Christy and Christopher off into, they just went to the Canyon City Hospital. Mom was being life flighted to Colorado Springs, and which was a 45 minute drive from the scene. So we sent Karita, and some of my in-laws went with Christy and Christopher into Canyon City, and Dad and me and Teresa and my father-in-law went up to the Colorado City to find the hospital that Mom was life flighted to. And we drove 45 minutes only to discover it was the wrong hospital, and so it was like another 20 minutes across town. And so about an hour and a half later, we finally got there. I remember thinking on the way up, like, what's going to happen? Am I going to be pushing Mom down in a wheelchair? Like, what does this mean? And we got to the hospital finally after about an hour and a half of running around. And as soon as they heard who we were there for, they ushered us into the quiet room. And I didn't really think anything of it. I'm just thinking of, is Mom okay? Like, what's going on? And eventually the doctor came in with a chaplain and started giving the news that Mom had actually died right after they left the ground. So within minutes, seconds, her heart had stopped, and so they spent the 9-minute flight trying to start it, and obviously after they got to the hospital, doing whatever they could, but she was gone. But at that point, she had been dead for over an hour, and so yeah, we just started bawling there, and just like not at all what you expect of a week like that, or just like pray for us. We were hit by a truck. Went and looked at Mom. She had all kinds of tubes coming out of her, and was pretty cold already by that point. And so yeah, it was just like excuse me, the rest of the week is pretty big blur. I remember we had just the night before, we had gone over kind of the order of events with our coordinators and the pastor, which is, that was the grace of God that we were able to get that in, because I know there was still a lot of stuff to do, but Teresa and I didn't do anything with the wedding after that. Yeah, her family obviously carried the big chunk of the load, and whoever else helped out, coordinators or whatever. We had the funeral on. Well, yeah, I remember. I forget if it was that night, Tuesday night, or if it was the next day. I think it was that night that Teresa came up and just said, like, I don't know what this means for us, but I still want to go through with this. I still want to get married, even if it means that we're living with your family for a little bit, or what, And I wasn't like, I had the thought of not getting married never crossed my mind. And so obviously it felt good to, be reassured that I've had a number of people ask me since that, like, wow, it's so amazing. Like, what made you go through that? Follow through on getting married and stuff. And my answer is just like, it never really crossed our minds to not do it. And I think too, it's, we're so in love. By the time you're engaged and you're at the wedding week, you're, emotionally, you're practically married.
Right.
And so just just now we have the grief journey to walk together. Like to kick the marriage can down the road would have just made it all the more worse, I think, and drug out. Even though it really impacted our marriage. And I didn't think about it until a year after. My brother had gotten married 6 weeks before me. And so a year after their wedding, I remember seeing pictures of the first few weeks of marriage and their honeymoon and everything, and just like the fun stuff that they did, and it was just like they had a great time. It was right. Wonderful, like newlyweds have. And that's when it hit me. It was like, we don't have that. Like we didn't have any of that. We don't have pictures like the pictures of us around that time. There's like, we're super tired in our eyes and just kind of look sad, and so then it really kind of, it was like a new grief process all over again. But I remember, yeah, it was like, so we had the wedding Friday. Let's see, days get mixed up. I guess we had the funeral Friday morning, and then we had the wedding rehearsal that night, and then the wedding on Saturday. And I remember the rehearsal, just feeling So the funeral was like we were all in tears again. It's going through grief. Oh, the night before, Thursday night would have been the viewing, and so there were hundreds of people that came through the viewing, and then again hundreds of people at the funeral. And by the time I got to the rehearsal, I just remember feeling so angry. Like I was just inside, just really angry. I didn't want to be there. I didn't not that I didn't want to get married. I just wanted to be by myself. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like the center. Teresa and I are the center of this occasion, mm-hmm. and yeah, just
who exactly were you angry at? Were you angry at at God for allowing it to happen, or more? Yeah, like who exactly, or were you just like angry at yourself and just wanted to get away?
Yeah, no. In the moment, I there wasn't anybody that I was angry at. Yeah, it was just anger. It was just the emotion. I think it was just kind of the natural flow of grief, maybe. There's, yeah, maybe. I'm gonna come back to that in just a second. But the next day at the wedding was really fun. Like it was the most joyful day of my year.
Oh wow!
Genuinely, it was incredible. It was an incredible wedding experience. I think our wedding was the best wedding ever. And I'm not just saying that. What's the word? Like flippantly or whatever. Just like that's the thing to say. But I do like. We haven't watched our wedding video recently, but we did for a while. Like we'd go back and watch the wedding video over again. We loved the music. The musicians did a great job. Everything. The people we had share at our wedding was just really good, and it was a good, joyful day. And people often wonder, like, how can you do that all at the same time? And I don't like for one thing, like the human psyche is just pretty amazing. Obviously, God has made us to feel all kinds of things. But it's kind of like eating an apple. Maybe like you're eating an apple, and what do you think about when you eat the apple? Do you think about the skin on the outside, or do you think the inside, like the white fleshy part that like you don't really think about it? You're just like eating the whole apple,
right? And
it was kind of that way. Like, there's intense grief and then incredible joy, all at the same time, and yet you're able to feel them both distinctly.
Mm.
Right? So yeah, I think to the question of like being angry at God, my wife really struggled in the months after that. I am a newlywed man wanting to sleep life away.
Mm.
At that point for my job, I was doing pretty much all warehouse stuff with Choice Books.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so, it's I think at that point it opened at 7. It closed at like 8:45. Right. Is that still kind of what it is?
That's still what it is, yeah.
As long as the work gets done in that time frame, I could work whenever.
Yeah.
And I just remember sleeping till 10:30 some days.
Wow.
Just like super depressed. I didn't call it depressed really then. I didn't really know that language. But then I drag myself out to go put in 7-8 hours. Thankfully, as a newly married couple, Teresa could come. The work was such that Teresa could come with me and work with me if she wanted to. She didn't all the time, but then I'd come back home and then we just like, if I'm working at 11, I'm probably coming home at 6:30 or 7, and then eating together and very quickly heading to bed.
Right.
Not doing a whole lot, like maybe hanging out with friends every now and then, or maybe watching a movie or something. But I just remember life was just extremely. I wanted, like, I literally just wanted to sleep life away.
Sure.
And but we're newlyweds, and Teresa's, you know, a newlywed should feel different things. Like we should be excited and
Mm-hmm.
doing all kinds of things together. And so I think in the moment I didn't know how to respond to her wrestling with that. I sort of responded by like not showing grief to her. And then after a while she wondered why I didn't cry with her. And so I was like trying to figure out how, this whole process of doing life with another person and like sharing, being close to each other, while also trying to give her, realizing that like I'm not a very pleasant person or soul to like be around right now. And so years later, the year later, when I was looking at my brothers and his wife in their first year, looking back on their photos a year later and just realizing the excitement and the thrill that they had and stuff. That's kind of when it hit me what Teresa was missing and what I was missing. And so there was some anger there that I remember dealing with again, and just kind of grief. And I'm not sure, like I think for myself, anger at God has always been more digging deep and discovering that that's what I actually am. Mm-hmm. Whereas I would have never, like I wasn't angry at God. Like right, I knew in my mind that like broken things happen. There's brokenness in the world, and there's, if anything, some of my siblings were like asking some more like really gut-wrenching questions about God and like, where is he and all this. And I wasn't really asking that. I just wanted to sleep life away. That was kind of my approach, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
But in actually like even years later, because we got married, within a month we were pregnant, and within 4 months, we were asked to move to Thailand.
Oh, wow.
And a year and a half later from being asked, we did move. No. Yeah, about a year later. A little over a year later. So, like, within 2 years, there's just, like, one thing right after another that is more emotionally involving almost. Like, you're prepping for a baby. You're learning how to do life together as a married couple. You're thinking about whether or not you want to move, and then you do move, and you're relocating. And so it was, I remember I was teaching in Thailand, and so I remember it was the first break from school after the first year. We were committed pretty much 3 years. So we knew what we were doing for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And it was that first break where all of a sudden there wasn't something that I should be thinking about next, or like processing next. Mm-hmm. That a whole bunch of emotions like came back to the surface for me. And I've discovered that's kind of the case. And it was actually in that summer that I got the idea to start writing my book. And I've noticed that I tend to do that. When I start feeling really uncomfortable emotions, I come up with really great ideas of things to do. And so it's actually in the last 10 years, it's had to be an intentional work at times to just kind of dig in and uncover grief. And then in that process, like discovering there is actually some anger at God, because life was so different than for somebody else, or and just kind of naming it, kind of acknowledging that.
Right.
That, but it's not like I've never like struggled with, is God real?
Right. Sure. Well, yeah. First off, thanks for sharing that. That was very powerful. Just listening. I'm sure you felt like during the whole funeral and the wedding process, I'm sure there was moments where you felt God's presence, just looking back and seeing, because I feel like, I don't know about yourself, but I feel like if it would be me, like there's no way you could almost do it on your own strength of getting through the funeral and then of getting married. Like the two polar opposites. One is like a very, very sad event, and one is supposed to be a very, very happy event.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah, we had so many people praying for us over that time, and
Right,
yeah,
right.
most definitely the grace of God.
Yeah, no kidding. So like if somebody would come up to you, say a non-believer would come up to you and you'd have told them just what you told me, um, and they would ask you the question like, why did God allow that to happen? Like, what would you tell them?
You know, yeah, as I think you might observe in some of my, like, whenever I give a message or something, like the thing that's really a passion of mine is the story of God
Mm-hmm.
and the whole narrative. And I think a lot of that comes back to my own processing, like, where does this fit into God
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and into what He's doing? I would not have been able to tell you the story of God, like what is the overarching message of the Bible, or what is God doing in life? Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what that story is at the time, but I think it sent me on a perhaps somewhat subconscious journey, and maybe even almost as much because of some of the questions my younger siblings were wrestling with.
Mm-hmm.
Because the paradigm of, well, I think a huge part of it was some of my best friends had gone through. So this was 2012, like 6 years before that, had lost their mom.
Mm.
So it wasn't a new journey, but still, like, that would have been true for my siblings as well. We were good family friends with them, and they lost their mom. But I did learn a lot from watching them grapple with, where is God in this, and um, the story of Job, realizing that there is space within God's sovereignty to allow extremely tragic things to happen in life.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that He's just completely out of control. Um, but this subconscious journey of what is the story of God, which is something that I just kind of started looking for, and eventually led to me going to Bible college at Eternity Bible College, where, like, their main thrust is biblical theology and discovering the story of God, as opposed to, like, systematic theology.
Right.
But that's been the number one thing to me in my Bible college experience, is realizing the beautiful thing that, first of all, God intended, and then then discovering, like, what happened, what's wrong in the world, and now what God is doing to restore it, and see how He is restoring it. And kind of coinciding, studying through the Bible, I'm taking church history classes as well and stuff, and as well as just kind of general history, and seeing movements of history and how the church has been advancing, or, like, what growing even, and what God is doing in the world through the church, through His people. Kind of all help solidify that, first of all, God is real, and God is active in this life, and that His story is real. And if His story is real, then these calamities, these painful events in life, are the result of the I don't really know why God allowed this. Like, I could rationalize, like, He wants a personal relationship with us, and so
Right.
we have to choose Him in order to do that, or whatever, like that. But the Bible doesn't necessarily say that inherently. But the story begins that man is given this option of, am I going to trust that what God calls good is good, or what God calls evil is evil, or am I going to go my own way and decide for myself what is good and evil? And when they choose to go their own way, then we see all these calamities begin to happen. And then the story of God, as it continues, this cosmic, not only does everybody struggle with this cosmic struggle of, am I going to trust God, or am I going to do my own thing? But also, as these calamities happen that are the results of other people, like, I didn't I have rebelled against God in my life, but I'm not the one who, like, nothing direct about my rebellion at the time. I was a Christian. I'm walking with God. Nothing about me led to a drunk man hitting my mom.
Right.
But that's his own choice. There's calamities that's happening outside of my control because humanity is now choosing to do what's right in their own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have a response in that calamity. Am I going to trust that God is good and that his way is good? Or am I going to try to make my way through that on my own, doing what I deem is right and good? And so yeah, I guess I would just, I mean, that is what I tell people is just like, there's, of all the narratives in the world, there's nothing that explains why these bad things happen as clearly as the biblical narrative. And there's also no narrative that gives so much hope for what God is doing in the process. Or like just the weird thing that, like, oh, a tragedy like that could actually make you into a better person. Like that's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly.
I wouldn't create a story like that, but that is what God does through the work of his Spirit. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question exactly.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Yeah, as you're talking, I just kind of got the thought of, like, none of us would say that your mom passing away was a good thing. Like, that would just be horrible to say that. That's so wrong. That's obviously, like, a really horrible thing. But seeing that and knowing that God is good, and like you just got done saying, by that happening, it allows us to draw closer to him, because he gives us a choice to draw closer to him. And I've experienced that in my own life. Like, some of the not so good things that happen, like nothing to that extent, but some of the not so good things that have happened in my life have allowed me to draw closer and become more intimate with him in my relationship with him. And like, some of the times when it feels like nothing else is there, like there's nobody else there, there's nothing else I can turn to but God, has allowed me to like really just cling on to him and just like give all my focus and all my attention to my relationship with him. And like, out of that can blossom, like you mentioned, like really good things and like a stronger relationship with him. So yeah, no, I really like the way that you put that. And so yeah, now you're here, living with your family. And I guess, what's life like today? Like, give me a little glimpse into your day-to-day life with your family and what you do for a living, or I guess since your mom's death, is there any, like, how have you seen God working in your life, I guess?
Yeah. Well, there's life with the family definitely has impacted me, and I think almost grows me. Like, God works on me more through my kids and raising kids than anything. It's been really interesting trying to help my children know what Grandma Witmer was like. Because obviously they don't know her. They know her through pictures, but there's nothing. We don't even really have much video. Like, we had a digital camera, but we didn't take much video. It was mostly pictures. So trying to help them understand what Mom was like. And so yeah, my dad has, since he's been remarried about a year now, so now they know his new wife better than my mom, and they will have a relationship with her more vivid than they ever have with Mom. But it's been interesting. Like, I think there were different comments and stuff that they made that kind of triggered me a little bit. I didn't expect them to make, and so it was kind of another process of grief for me.
Sure.
And it's been interesting observing them, like, watch me go through that grief, and then like recognizing how, yeah, like even to see the way that my grief is impacting them, and they respect that. Like they're of the age now where they can like recognize that and kind of, understand a little bit, even though they don't know Grandma Witmer.
Right.
They understand that a little bit, and so that's been an interesting element to observe. And I think the way that God has worked most significantly in my life as a married man with children is just realizing what it's like to love your kids, to love your wife, and recognizing that that's like I do that very imperfectly, and I'm still very selfish, and yet that's a glimpse or a picture of God's love for me, and God's presence with me. Like to see my kid go through grief or suffering just tears at my heart. And so it gives me a picture into what God has probably felt for me in the grief process. And I think that's definitely been a big growing, shaping thing as it concerns discovering more about God. But interestingly, I have dealt with a lot of what's the word for it? Under the surface anger. Since, it seems like there's a better psychological word for it, but I can't think of it. Since having kids, for some reason, it didn't really come out until my kids started getting to the age where they could disobey. And then, like, it led me on this journey of like processing what's wrong with me, because I love my kids. Right. I'm not angry at my kids. But the fact that I would tell them to do something and they just ignore that has brought up anger just like in a moment that has made me realize it's actually like, so obviously that started, whenever Kenneth was 2, he's 8. So like 6 or 7 years ago, that started surfacing. And so it kind of led into a journey of, that's actually part of what led me to realize there's a lot of stuff that I probably haven't processed, even whether from mom's death, or there's even been some things in life that Teresa and I have gone through that are similar, not like a death experience, but it impacts you emotionally, and you don't realize always that it has impacted you until it snaps out in some anger or something.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing. Yeah, like God is using my kids to show me a lot of Himself, and then also like confront things, work on me and things in my own life.
Yeah. Wow. Very well said. Yeah. Well, as we wrap it up here, I pre-warned you beforehand that I was going to ask you this question, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've asked like everybody I've had on this podcast this question, and I love like all the different answers I've gotten. A lot of really good sound advice has come through this answer to this question, and the question is this: like, if you could tell your younger self something, and then kind of along with that, if you could tell the Anabaptist / general youth of the world something today, like what advice would you give them, or what would you tell them?
Yeah, so I guess if I would tell my younger self something, maybe I'll do like this is like not necessarily a spiritual answer or whatever, but it's something that I think about a lot, and that is how, and this might be, I don't know if you've gotten this answer before, because it seems like maybe what everybody would give at a graduation convocation or something, but what you're doing right now is sowing something that will bear fruit later. I heard that many times as a youth, but I didn't realize how real that is.
Mm.
Like what you do right now. So that's anything, whether it's how you're handling your finances right now,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's the types of friendships you're creating, whether that's how much time you're spending in God's word or developing spiritual disciplines, or whether that's, you know, if you think of a craft that you have, or an interest that you have, but it takes some work. And so it's easy to, you know, just go hang out with your friends or spend time watching movies or something, as opposed to putting in the work. You enjoy that craft, it's kind of passionate, but it also takes some work, and so it's easy to just kind of let it slide. Well, when you put in the work, if you want to ever have the dream realized, or if you ever want the skill set that you would like to have one day, you got to put in the work now. Like what you sow now, you will reap later. And just that concept, I don't think, I'm sure people have heard that many different times, but for myself, as a younger self, just to say, even what you eat now is going to affect your energy level and like your the way your joints and everything feels. So if you're 14, 15 now, like you'll think I'm totally making up stories, but it's real. Like it'll affect how you feel as a 25-year-old.
Right.
The kinds of stuff you put into your body, and it's stuff that I'm trying to learn now. Like just realizing, wow, like I can feel totally different. I'm 31. That's not actually that old, but it's old enough to feel like I can go one day and feel like lately my just on Sunday we celebrated my birthday, and Jess made the delicious chocolate cake. Oh, I love chocolate cake. Gotta have chocolate cake with milk.
Right.
But man, if you have a slice of that every day, like it affects how I feel.
Yeah.
By the end of the week. And so just that concept, like what you're doing now is going to reap something later. So that's what I would tell my younger self. And then as far as just general youth, Anabaptist youth, or youth in general, I think I would say get to know the story of God. And there's a lot of things, like something that did not exist when I was a youth, that would have helped me see the story of God. Helps anybody see it now, but I would have been able to see it so much more than just reading my Bible. The black and white words in my Bible is the Bible study tool. Bible project is what it's called. The charts and the short videos that they create help you get a glimpse of how each book fits into the overarching story, and then you read through the book and you can see those movements that they talk about in their videos and stuff. So get to know the story of God. One of the ways that can help you get to know that is through the Bible Project.
Wow. Yeah. Very good answer. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap this one up. Asher, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing wisdom and knowledge with all of us younger people. I feel like we definitely have a lot to learn from not old people, but older people like you, who have experienced a lot in life and have learned a lot in life. And so thank you just for gifting us with your time and just sharing with us. And for all you listeners out there, thank you for listening, and go, as mentioned before, go check out Asher's podcast, Unfeigned Christianity. You can find it, I'm sure, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, basically wherever podcasts are. Yeah. So go check it out. Very, very good podcast. You definitely won't be disappointed. And thanks for taking the time to listen, and join us next time, whatever that is or whatever it may look like.
Unfeigned Christianity is brought to you by our members at Patreon. As a part of the membership program, you receive 2 deep dive essays a month and expanded versions of all our podcast interviews. If you would like to become a member, visit www.asherwhitmer.com/member. Unfeigned Christianity podcast is also a part of 2 networks, the Restorative Faith Collective, where we have conversations about race, perspectives, and relationships in an Anabaptist context. To learn about more articles and podcasts, visit www.restorativefaithcollective.org. The second network is the Kingdom Outpost, where we talk about what it looks like to live as Jesus' nation in today's world. For more podcasts and articles, visit kingdomoutpost.org. Thanks for listening.